Good morning, I am Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you. Going to spend some time talking to you about you and your business. It's your business to be aware of what's happening on the political front, to take steps to really better your lives and better your economy. And knowing what's happening on the political front is really important. And one of those guys that I think is extremely well-versed in that topic is our guest, the first segment, former Virginia Governor James Gilmore. Welcome, sir. We're glad to have you back on the show. It's been a while.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm glad to talk to your listeners today, particularly today.
We're glad to have you. And by the way, how bad is the snow out there?
There's no snow in Virginia. I'm located in Alexandria, Virginia, but it's apparently pretty heavy snow up there in the Northeast and particularly in New York. But down here, it's very pleasant today, about 50.
Yeah, that global warming is just really messing everything up. But anyway, Governor, always glad to have you on the program. You're with an organization that's near and dear to my heart, Free Congress Foundation. And in fact, I've written for it back in the 80s quite a bit when Paul Weyrich was in charge, and was a really a great organization, and continues to be. And I love the work you're doing and the metamorphosis you're doing to get them to become leaders on the tax debate as well. Kind of tell us what Free Congress is all about before we get into some of our topics for today.
Well, Free Congress is an old conservative research institution. You can find two web pages on us. One is freecongress.org, and the second is our program, AmericanOpportunity.org. Our signature issue is the growth of the American economy. We just are not satisfied that the economy has ever come back from the recession. Too many people are unemployed. Too many young people can't find careers. Too many people in the African-American community can't find jobs. Women can't find jobs. There's no career opportunities, and wages are stagnant. And we just think that the country is going to be in better shape if we really did make some changes. Tax reform is our proposal. We know that tax reform works to grow the economy. We know that everything that's been done in the last several years has been anti-growth. We want to do things that are positive for growth. Then we also are interested in some urban issues from the point of view of a conservative, and we're interested also in national security issues. It's been a lifelong love of mine.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people aren't familiar with the Free Congress Foundation, but almost everyone's familiar with the Heritage Foundation, which was actually founded by the same person who founded Free Congress. Paul Weyrich founded that as well. A great organization. Love the work you're doing. And so you got a great opportunity with this new Republican Congress, and although I join many like yourself who could not have been happier by the way a lot of that voting went for candidates. A little shocked to see how things went with the initiative and referendums around the country, showing a little schizophrenia, I guess. But nonetheless, it's a great opportunity. Kind of tell me what you think that agenda should be for that new Congress.
Well, I'll be happy to do that. And let me, divide for your listeners. Free Congress Foundation is nonpartisan. It's a 501c3. Anybody that donates to us online gets a tax deduction. So I don't do politics at a Free Congress Foundation, right, but I do policy. And when the time comes to apply that policy to politics, then I put on my hat as former governor of Virginia, former chairman of the RNC, Republican National Committee, and I'm happy to advocate for good policy. Look, what we saw in this last election was the American people rising up almost as one and saying they don't like the programs of Washington, D.C., and they want to see change. That's why you saw a big majority in the United States Senate this time, but also why you saw the Republicans win governorships in places like Massachusetts and Illinois and even Maryland, for heaven's sakes. That we got Republican governors there now. And what this tells you is the people were coming out in droves to change the direction of the nation.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. Job one, what would you say, particularly with the fact that there was a huge number of people that often weren't that politically interested in general, but seemed to came out to cast a vote against what's happened. I think a lot of it had to do with Obamacare, frankly. You know what? You know the joke? The joke is what's a conservative? A conservative is a liberal that's been mugged. Well, I think millions of Americans felt mugged by Obamacare, and I
think they do. And Obamacare is, it's got a couple of the elements in it, like pre-existing condition support and all that. But the biggest problem is that, it's just a heavy financial burden on people and on corporations who now have to fire people or limit their hours, and that's once again anti-growth. Look, we think that the program ought to be this. The number one bill in both the House and the Senate in Washington ought to be a growth economic program. We haven't really seen anything like that. And we owe it to the American people. The Congress ought to get on their horses and do a real growth program to add jobs and wage increases in this country. I'm not talking about the minimum wage. I'm talking about building up the economy so there are more opportunities, and then at that point, wages will go up because, economic activity is bidding for more people, and that means wages go up. If you do it artificially, just through the minimum wage, that's good for a few people, but it really doesn't afford them the opportunity that we at Free Congress believe they should have.
Talking to former Virginia Governor Jim Gilmore. He's also the president of the Free Congress Foundation. And talking about some of those things that Republicans should focus on. The United States has the worst regulatory environment of any industrialized country in the world because of the multiple layers of regulations that business owners have to face. We, of course, have the worst legal environment than any industrialized country, where it's so easy for people to sue other people. And we have the worst tax environment for businesses of any industrialized country in the world. We took over Japan's position of number one in that spot a couple of years ago. Of those three areas, where do we really need to focus to get things started?
I will be specific with your listeners. They can go to our webpage at Free Congress and at American Opportunity to look at the growth code, and that lays out the essentials. But this is what we need to do. Number one, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. That means that corporations that compete with us on a global basis have an advantage, which means you can hire fewer people and pay lower, and you have to pay, low wages because there's just not enough economic activity. So, in short, you got to reduce the corporate tax rate. If you get rid of a bunch of the loopholes, you can bid the price down to 15%. And now we're competitive with people around the world. Number two, you ought to unify all business. Small businesses and big businesses ought to be taxed the same at 15%. Number three, you ought to have tax reform in this country across the board, 10, 15, and 25% on the personal level, and you ought to do it immediately. That reduces taxes for most people. Number four, we ought to be able to repatriate money from overseas at no additional tax so that they can be reinvested in this country. Number five, there's a whole series of things that have been enacted the last couple of years that will make it harder on corporations and entrepreneurs and businesses, and that kind of stuff ought to be thrown in the trash, and let's get started with a real growth program in this country.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you as a former governor and someone very politically savvy about 2016, the next presidential cycle. There's an old saying, senators talk and governors do, and there's a lot of very articulate U.S. senators, but I, for one, am looking among governors as potential presidential candidates. Is there anyone out there that you think that you'd like to see get some traction? Again, not wearing your Free Congress hat, but as someone who I know also votes.
Well, I think that people who have been governors, and I've been a governor,
yes, sir,
are used to the executive challenges of putting together budgets, making sure that you're really looking after the people within your state, and actually get that skill in governing. Senators certainly know a lot, or they see a lot at the federal level, but a lot of it's just grandstanding, whereas governors don't get to do that. They have to govern their states and be accountable for what they do. I have not at this point seen anybody out there that I'm happy with that is probably going to grow the economy. There's a lot of scattered thinking out there, but I'm determined that in 2016 that a program be offered to grow the economy of this country, get wages up and people employed. And I'm going to do everything I can do to make sure that these programs go into effect in this environment and in 2016.
Governor James Gilmore, so glad to have you back on the program. Check out AmericanOpportunity.org. That's AmericanOpportunity.org, and check out the Growth Code. And it is incredibly specific, and you've got some great resources there. Thanks for your time, sir.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. I look forward to talking to your listeners again.
You bet. When we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at usdatareview.com, and you're listening to The Price of Business.